I am incredibly excited to have the author of the current #1 book on Amazon, not in a subcategory, not in cultural theory, not in social commentary, across all books. He's beating J.K. Rowling, for God's sakes. Christopher Rufo, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing very well, and I appreciate that clarification. I'm always looking when people say #1 bestseller and in some obscure category. And so I was actually really shocked to wake up and get messages from my publisher and my agent saying, hey, you're #1 on all of Amazon across all categories. Obviously a huge honor, very exciting. This is my first book. So it's just unbelievable to have that kind of distinction.
Well, let me put it up. This is the beauty right here, which I've yet to read. I've perused through it in preparation. I mean, I quickly went through it in preparation for our chat, but I'm hoping to read it soon. Let me just introduce you for those of you who may not know you. This is from your media kit. You're a documentarian. I think you've been part of 4 films, senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, contributing editor at City Journal. You are a leading activist in the fight against CRT, critical race theory. Your investigative reporting has garnered the attention of President Donald Trump, which led to an executive order banning CRT from being promulgated by federal agencies. You are a repeat guest, maybe the nicest part in your CV. You are a repeat guest on the Saad Truth, having first appeared in October 2021. I'll put a link to that first appearance in our show. And again, the book, currently #1 of all books on Amazon, America's Cultural Revolution, How the Radical Left Conquered Everything. Anything else you want to add to the bio before we get going, Christopher?
That sounds great. Yeah, let's dig in.
Okay, so what I did notice in quickly going over your book is that you have broken up into 4 sections in a sense that capture some of the promulgators of a lot of the nonsense that we're seeing. Maybe you can just start by telling us who those 4 people are, what their ideologies are, and hence why they've been such troublemakers.
Yeah, so the basic structure of the book is to look at America's cultural revolution in 4 parts. The first part is the theory of revolution itself. And so I profile the New Left philosopher Herbert Marcuse, who really laid down the basic ideology for the radical left in the 1960s and early 1970s. That continues to this day. Marcuse was really a prophet for the modern left. He was a deeply trained neo-Marxist philosopher, part of the Frankfurt School, who left Europe prior to World War II, came to the United States, and having dug into his work, I mean, he's really a brilliant man, but his philosophy that he so carefully laid out yielded disaster in his time, yielded disaster everywhere it's been tried. And I really think is currently yielding disaster, as you've seen in recent years with BLM, with the rioting, with the gender movement, with all of these various strands of left-wing thinking. The second section is race. And I profile Herbert Marcuse's most famous student, Angela Davis, the famous communist revolutionary, Black Panther Party member, and academic radical who was the genesis in many ways for the modern BLM movement. The BLM activists, of course, cite her by name. She's their personal mentor, and all the ideas that you see from BLM really can be easily and directly traced back to Angela Davis. The third is education. I profile the Brazilian education theorist Paulo Freire and show his really vast and remarkable influence over our graduate schools of education, which of course influence how teachers in K-12 schools approach their students. And finally, I look at critical race theory. I spend the last quarter of the book digging into the history of CRT, digging into the ideology, profiling Derek Bell, the godfather of the CRT movement, and showing that if we follow CRT, if we make critical race theory into a system of governance, it's going to lead to really the dismemberment of the American Constitution and the replacement of the American Republic with a system of DEI bureaucrats who redistribute power, wealth, land, and prestige according to the bureaucracy, not according to any individual rights or merits.
The last gentleman was he was a Harvard professor. So would he have been the guy that, I can't remember if is he the one that Barack Obama viewed as a mentor? Is that the same guy?
That's right. Yeah, there's this famous video that came out in the 2012 presidential campaign, Obama's campaign for re-election, that tied him to Derek Bell. He actually was a Harvard Law student at the time. Derek Bell was engaging in a protest against Harvard Law School, which he denounced as a racist and sexist. And Obama very famously gives a speech in defense of Derek Bell, praises Derek Bell, gives a nice warm hug to Derek Bell. It actually fell flat during the campaign. It wasn't the line of attack that Republicans had hoped it would be, because critical race theory is very abstract. It's very intellectual. It didn't have the immediate resonance or political punch that might have been required. But it's a really interesting genealogy where you have Derek Bell becoming Harvard Law's first full-time African-American professor in the late 1960s. He has a radical turn, trained some of his students into a discipline that then became known as critical race theory, and had an influence even on the future president of the United States of America. And so CRT is not the right-wing fantasy that some on the left had claimed it would be, but actually something with a very concrete lineage. It conquered elite institutions, it conquered the graduate schools of education, and then it conquered so many K-12 classrooms around the country.
Now, in your book, you're making the specific point. I mean, there are real nefarious objectives and goals behind these ideologies. A frontal attack on Western tradition, Western values, and of course, I fully agree with those. And certainly, when it comes to Marxism and so on, which are completely antithetical to our way of life. In my previous book, The Parasitic Mind, I take a slightly more charitable position, not to be frivolously charitable, but I argue that many of the idea pathogens, as I call them, really start off not necessarily with nefarious goals. They start off with a noble goal, which then metamorphosizes into nonsense in the pursuit of that noble goal. So, for example, equity feminisms, most people would agree with. Men and women should be treated equally under the law. But then radical feminists usurp that movement and argue that if we're going to make substantive changes in the dynamics between the sexes, we have to argue that men and women are indistinguishable from each other. There are no biological differences that define male or female. So is there any room, in your view, for some of these ideologues actually not being the diabolical, nefarious folks that we think they are, but where they're actually coming from a good place, or it's all negative?
No, I mean, I think that when you read through the book, and I've had even kind of left-wing critics and left-wing people in my orbit who've read the book say, "Wow, the analysis, the biographical sketches is honest, it's compassionate, it's very human. You understand these folks even at points of disagreement in a real way." And what I tried to do with the book is really first understand these figures as they understood themselves. And of course, they understood themselves as fighting for noble goals. And then the most self-aware of these figures realized in some cases, and then became disillusioned with the horrible consequences that emerged from these goals. And so I think the big story in the book, the driving structure of all these narratives, is the process of idealism being corrupted and then yielding unintended consequences that are really devastating. And so, for example, Paulo Freire, he had a noble goal, which was to free third world populations from Western imperialism, domination, and exploitation, and to teach the citizens of these formerly colonial countries how to read, how to have political consciousness, how to engage in a democratic process. But what you see over the course of his career is that as he worked with these Marxist-Leninist regimes in the third world, in Africa and Latin America in particular, he became a propagandist for a new totalitarianism that was in some cases worse than the colonial regimes that preceded them. They were barbaric, they were torturers, they were killers, they engaged in horrific crimes, they looted their own countries. And researchers have found that his theories of literacy, going into a country like Guinea-Bissau on the west coast of Africa, they made him the leader of their educational efforts, bringing literacy to the masses, bringing literacy to the countrysides and the tribal people of the interior. But some researchers looked into it. They had access to the archives, and they found that he actually didn't teach anyone how to read. He was just purely disseminating political propaganda. It didn't work to teach these poor, deprived people even basic literacy skills. And so the story of the book is the story of idealistic people that had an ideology that they thought was going to make the world a better place, to transcend the limitations and the oppressions of their time, that had catastrophic unintended consequences. And I think that process of idealism and disillusionment is at the heart of left-wing ideologies. It seems that wherever we look, the people who follow this logical strand that is very appealing on the surface level, there's something inexorable about this process that, as it unfolds over time, yields these conclusions that are a dramatic reversal from what they intended.
Do you think that a lot of the ideas that are promulgated by these four folks, and more generally many of these sort of parasitic ideas, do you think that they are more likely to be stickable, or or impress young people because of this kind of unicornia utopian vision, right? And then, as we know, many people grow out of that sort of that progressivism bent, right? But all other things equal, if I'm 20 years old and I'm at Brown University, yes, I think the world is unfair, and I think that Marxism is a great way to create equality. We'll all hold hands and sing Imagine by John Lennon. So do you think that ultimately many of those ideas that might be intoxicating to me when I'm 20 eventually lose appeal? Like, do we grow out of these ideas or not?
Yeah, I mean, some of us do. I know that I certainly did. I mean,
so
I
you started off with
a
a progressive bent?
For sure, yeah, very much so. Yeah, I started off with a very kind of hard left bent, and when I was in my teenage years and even into college, and then kind of life experience, my own study, my own experience, my own travel especially, dissuaded me from that philosophical system, because I found that it wasn't compatible with the reality as I really understood it. And but the question that you have is a really good one, and I think that, as a conservative, I have to concede to my friends and opponents on the left that their system of ideas has really mastered the strategies for tapping into human emotions, human motivation, human inspiration, and they do it on both poles. They do it on a negative pole, because they are really just masterful at manipulating the feelings of guilt, envy, resentment, hatred, very powerful, dark emotions that guide so much of human behavior. They have a great ability to cast the villain in the story quite persuasively. And then on the positive side, someone like Marcuse or a Paulo Freire, they propose these really inspirational, beautiful, utopian concepts. You'll be liberated from your oppressors. You will find freedom in your life beyond necessity. You will have even unrestrained sexuality. Marcuse was famous for, we don't need the superego anymore. We can have a flowering and totally free sexuality. And so, when you're 20, that sounds great. You don't need to get a job. You don't need to fit into the system. You don't need to be productive. And you can have a kind of utterly free sexual experience at that age. It's like, that sounds great. And by the way, you're morally superior to all these other bad people out there that are the ones that are really holding you back. And so, look, I mean, that is a very attractive narrative for people, especially younger people. But then you have to then say, all right, great, that's a nice promise, but does the promise deliver? And I found that in my own life experience as a human being, in my own study as an intellect, looking at a wider range of reading and materials and arguments, and then in my own observation, the actual direct observation of the world, of my external world, reality, having traveled to many countries in my 20s during my time as a documentary filmmaker, I concluded this is like, there's absolutely no way that this set of ideas, the set of ideas, of course, in the book, the set of ideas more broadly, has any chance of conforming with reality in a way that actually leads to true human happiness or human flourishing.
One of the things that's remarkable in your life, and in a sense, I could easily link it to, I have a forthcoming book next week. Forgive the shameless plug on my show. I have a book on happiness. And part of the joy of life are the serendipitous, unexpected moments that happen to us, that fall on our lap. And I think, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, I think one of the things that's quite remarkable in your career, I mean, you didn't set out necessarily to be at the place that you are today. Sure, you were interested in immersing yourself in ideas, but the CRT stuff that came your way was in some sense accidental, right? Where people would send you what's happening with them. So maybe could you trace for us, how you went from wherever you were 3-4 years ago to today having the #1 book across all of Amazon? How did that happen? And does it really speak to the magic of serendipity?
Yeah, no, I mean, it does. Serendipity is everything. I think in my younger days, in my 20s, I was, hyper focused, hyper driven, hyper success oriented, and I planned everything. I made these, these looking back, kind of ridiculous plans of this is what I'm going to do in 3 years, 5 years, and I found that way of thinking and living it could put so much pressure on the self. And that it squashes creativity. It squashes your own receptivity to the world, to chance, to friendships, to experiences. And as I learned to give that up and be open to more experiences, something I can probably still work on today, all of these amazing opportunities happened that I think I was ready to and curious enough to look into. And so moving from the left to the right was based on serendipity. Moving to a career in the documentary film world was based on a chance encounter I had in a grocery store when I was getting ready to graduate from college. Getting into politics was in some ways serendipitous. And then CRT, which really launched me on the trajectory I had today, came from an anonymous tip sent to my email that I was curious about, I followed up on, I reported on, and it led to this really incredible sequence of events where I was then invited on Tucker Carlson. I then called on President Trump to issue an executive order to abolish CRT. The next morning, I actually get a call from the White House saying that, hey, the president was watching Tucker last night. He saw you and he agrees. He wants to do an executive order. Can you come, rally with our team, on Zoom? It was during the pandemic, and help us craft this order. And then that led to a book deal with HarperCollins, and now we find it on the #1 bestseller as it comes out today. And all of this is, I like to think through my own efforts, through my own talents, through my own capacities. And I think there is that. You have to work hard. You have to have talent. You have to really pursue these opportunities. But a lot of it, and really the genius of our system in the United States of having, free enterprise, having individual rights, having a free press, having free association, with some limits, unfortunately, it allows for that serendipity to happen.
Yeah.
As opposed to a planned society, a communist society, a dreary society. And I think that paradoxically, the people who, Herbert Marcuse was a prophet of spontaneity. He actually used that exact word over and over in his work. But his philosophy leads to a deadened society that is planned, that is antithetical to the spontaneity that we need in life. And so the liberal system, and there are anti-liberals on the left and the right, but the liberal system at its best allows for that spontaneous reaction of ideas and forces and material that creates so much of our happiness that is cannot be described in rational terms, and it cannot be planned through rational means.
Well, one of the things that I talk about in my forthcoming book, when I'm discussing what I consider to be the two most important decisions that can either impart great misery on an individual or great happiness, is the following two choices: choosing the right spouse and choosing the right profession. Now, when it comes to choosing the right profession, I argue that all other things equal, the professions that are most likely to impart the greatest amount of purpose and meaning are ones that allow you to instantiate yourself within the creative impulse. Now, the creative impulse could be, I'm a chef, therefore I create new dishes that before I put my hands on them did not exist on that plate. It could be creating as an architect. I create, all kinds of monuments, bridges, buildings. I can create as a filmmaker, as you did. I can create as a professor in my scientific work. I can create as an author. I can create as a podcaster. So do you feel that a lot of the serendipitous moments that have allowed you to have the trajectory that has led you to where you are today stems specifically in your case also from being someone who has to constantly be immersed within the creative impulse?
Yeah, it's interesting though. For me, there's a bit of a wrinkle to the story. I mean, first of all, I think that the choice of a spouse and a family is number one. I think that's the most important decision related to happiness. And I'm very fortunate to have an incredible spouse and three incredible kids. And even when things are tough or stressful at work, you go home and you reconnect with your family or spend the weekend together, and it's just the best. It doesn't beat that. But actually, in my career as a filmmaker, I was very unhappy for many years. I felt very frustrated. I felt like the medium was not quite right. And I'm still not even really sure how to describe it or why that is. But I felt a restlessness. And then I felt like I was forcing myself to do it by the end. And fortunately made the decision to shift into writing, reporting, politics, then writing a book, which is much more suitable to me. So I think that there's also some specificity. So I'm a creative person. In the arts, documentary, filmmaking, writing. I work with photographers, video editors, graphic designers. That is the bulk of my day, the bulk of my week. But there's also a specificity that you need to have. The creative enterprise that for whatever reason kind of conforms or fits within your own pattern, your own way of thinking, your own skills and talents. And so I think I finally tapped into that. And I think really this book is the best creative product I've ever done by far, the one that has provided me the most satisfaction. And on Sunday, the day before we started media for the book launch, I was talking with my wife. I started to feel anxious for the first time about the book. So, oh my gosh, this book is coming out. I've never published a book. I don't know how it's going to perform. I got this, large advance from my publisher. I don't want him to be disappointed in the book, and kind of thinking about how the public's going to react. And she said something very interesting. She says, examine how you feel about the book. You've come a long way. You've found your medium. You've put everything into it. You didn't leave any stone unturned. You tried to the greatest of your efforts. It's in print with a publisher. You've done everything you can. You're going to do all the media that you can to promote it. And now you have to let go. And I felt, then kind of the anxiety dissipate and said, yeah, this is my creativity is now done. This is what I've produced. This is what I've created. And it's up to other people how they respond. And then as soon as I stopped caring about the result, then I get a text from my agent and my publisher saying, you're number one. And so it's kind of it's a paradox, right? Creativity is about effort and strenuous exertion, but then also about openness, receptivity, and letting go. It's I don't know. It's you almost think that if you analyze it too much, you might lose it. But it's such a mystery. It's such a fascinating process, and something that you have deep experience with. I'd be curious to hear your take.
Well, thank you for asking. I remember when my first book came out. This was an academic book, meaning it wasn't a trade book. It was it would certainly wouldn't have been read by many hundreds of thousands of people. It's this book right here, The Evolutionary Basis of Consumption. And I remember that once I had finished it, I had something that I think would be an accurate analogy, something akin to a postpartum depression, because as you know now, Christopher, having given birth to this book, this big intellectual baby, you've been so focused. You went off into this cave where you opened your laptop with not a single syllable having been struck at one point. There was a point a year ago where you didn't have a word. And then a year later, you've got this complete narrative, it goes off to your publisher, and now you start twiddling your thumbs. That's it. What's going to happen? So I wasn't even thinking at that point about whether it'll be successful or not. And luckily for an academic book, it was, it was very successful. And of course, I've written many books since. But I really felt the blues. So so before I add anything else, are you feeling a bit of that, or are things moving so quickly, especially with its success, that you haven't had a chance to even process any of the postpartum part?
Yeah, I felt that postpartum depression with some of my film projects,
Interesting.
and my early work, and I think that looking back, it stems from this gnawing feeling that working on these films, I worked, and they were broadcast on PBS. They went to film festivals. One of them went to Netflix, and by some objective measures, you could say that they were successful. They kind of reached an audience in some way. But I had this gnawing feeling that maybe I didn't even quite understand at the time, that, oh, I put all this into it. I feel there's some anxiety, there's some kind of turmoil inside. And the reason for that, looking back, was that it's like, does this matter? I put all this effort into this film. I raised money. We worked, for years on this thing. It's out there in the world. It broadcasts on TV. But is it making any dent in the world? Is it having any impact on people? And I had this gnawing suspicion that the answer was probably no. And that probably generated some of those negative feelings. With the book, I think that I haven't felt any of that at all. I think partially because the medium is really suitable to me. I loved writing the book. I loved doing the research. I loved working on the edits with the editors and publishers and designing the cover, and doing all of that work. And then I had this sense of ease when it was done, and kind of let go, didn't think about it. And now I have a real sense, a tangible sense, that this book, it matters. It's important to people, not just because it's, kind of climbed up the charts to #1 by the release date, but also because I know that the story that I'm telling in this book, the story of the radical left's long march to the institutions, is going to help so many people that are struggling right now, looking around at their communities and seeing that their university, their children's school, their local government, the media that they read is saturated with these really insidious ideologies. And I know that it's going to give so many people like that, who are wondering, what the hell happened in 2020? How is it that all of our institutions are suddenly deranged? I know that it's going to provide them with some deep answers. And so I think that I've escaped that feeling so far. Maybe when the flurry of activity ends, maybe it'll set in. But for the time being, it's great. It's such a good feeling, and I'm so excited to share it with people.
And I can promise you, and certainly given the reception that your book has received so far, the positivity wave is going to go on for the foreseeable future. There's almost nothing as rewarding to me as when I receive a photo of someone sitting at a beach with a copy of my book, and then they tag me. And it actually comes from a very humble place, because the reaction that I get is, that person who's going to the beach could have chosen 1 million different things to do, let alone 1 million different books to read at the beach. And yet they chose mine, and they're enjoying it. And so I predict that, I mean, of course, #1, that's a great metric of the fact that it's successful. But I think it's the personal cues that you will receive from people. It's those emails where someone says, I started off as a Brown University, unicornia leftist, and then your book brought me to my senses. So I expect that you're going to have a tsunami of good feelings moving forward. And that's fantastic.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. And it's really, it's like a miraculous feeling. You say, wow, I mean, what an honor that people are spending their time. And okay, you go on TV, you do a 3-minute news piece, and it's exciting, and maybe you get some emails, hey, I saw you on Fox last night, great job. But for someone to invest the hours and hours it takes to read a book is a commitment. I mean, it really is a commitment to the author, a tremendous honor to the author, a sign of respect to the author. And it's something that none of us, innately deserve, right? I mean, it's like people can choose to do anything that they want. And to have people choose to do that, to read the book, commit to the book, enjoy the book, let themselves be reached by the book. I mean, I'm so excited, and I'm starting to get that trickling in. I sent the book out in advanced copies to a number of people, and I'm starting to get feedback from my peers, people in politics, people in the media world, and it's, these are all people that have busy schedules, and some of them it's like, wow, I'm so honored that you read the book, you love it, you understand it, you appreciate it. And so I take none of it for granted. I'm still kind of, in a state of astonishment and gratitude. Yeah, I mean, it really is a grateful feeling, I love it.
Do you think, so this is something that I actually faced with my last book, and I'm hoping to not have to face with the happiness book. And that is that, look, the happiness book is a universal theme that should be read by anybody, irrespective of their political persuasion. But when it came to the parasitic mind, or when it came to your current book right here, you expect that people who share your vision of the world might be the ones who consume it. Whereas what you want, really, from a pragmatic perspective, is to get the folks on CNN, the folks, on MSNBC, to be saying, oh, let me check this out and let's see if he's got arguments. Now, I can speak for myself. Regrettably, I wasn't able to get on a lot of the shows where the parasitic mind would have had the most influence, because otherwise I'm preaching to the converted, people who say, yeah, of course, I agree with Professor Saad. Do you worry about that? And did you take specific steps to be able to convince those that need to be convinced in reading this book?
Yeah, I have two answers to that. One is a more strategic and political answer. And the lesson that I've learned in the recent years of political activism that I've done, that has been successful, it's influenced presidential order, legislation in 22 states. We reformed the curriculum on CRT. We abolished gender ideology in states. Just this year, I've led a campaign to abolish the DEI bureaucracy in public universities successfully so far in Florida and Texas. And so as far as actual influence, the lesson that I've learned is that preaching to the choir is actually the best and most important and most effective means of influence. And it really is the whole game. You have to actually reach people that are most likely to, at the marginal way, right? The lowest cost for influence. You have to engage those people first, and then go out in concentric circles. And in some ways, you don't actually have to, persuade your deepest opponents. You have to defeat them in the public square, in the political process. That said, I love doing opposition media. I love going on CNN and MSNBC and NPR and the New York Times and Jacobin and wherever else. And I'm really working hard, and my team, both with me and also at HarperCollins, the publisher, we're trying. We keep reaching out to people. We're trying to engage. We're trying to persuade. I'm offering to do any interviews, and I said, look, any kind of left-leaning media, book my time. I'm open. I'll come on your show. I'll debate. I'll let you criticize me. I'll let you yell at me. If you're so outraged by what I'm writing. And so far, we've had limited success, and I just find it to be such a disappointing moment in our political culture, where, even when I was younger, kind of during the Bush years, still on the left, and then kind of on the right towards the end of that period. In the early Obama years, you still had programs, very famously the CNN Crossfire kind of format, where you had people on left and right, and they were always debating. Where is that? Why don't we have that anymore? I just find it so engaging to debate. It sharpens me. It sharpens my opponent. It creates a higher sense of stakes. It allows people to hear two arguments side by side and make their own minds up. And I think it does engage in that work of persuasion. So I'm sure you're like me in the sense that it's such a disappointment that we don't have that. And I'm trying to revive it. We'll see if we can do that over the next 2 to 3 weeks. If we can, we can. But if we can't, we can't. Ultimately, it's up to them. I'm open to it, and we'll see how my critics respond.
I think if I can offer you a compliment, you walk the nice balance between having the honey badgerhood that I talk about in the parasitic mind, right? When I ask people, please activate your inner honey badger. So you've got the capacity to be punchy and combative and so on. But I think there is a personal style, right? So for example, the fact that you smile and don't appear sullen already softens any combative positions that you take. So I think from many of the people that I can see being able to speak to those on the opposite, end of the political aisle, you've got the unique set of skills of being a honey badger, yet being a friendly honey badger that would hopefully allow you to speak to the folks that are in loony land.
Yeah, you have to have both. And I think it's, perhaps stems from a psychological quirk that I have, is that I love politics. I love the fight. I love the scrum. I love the muckraking. I love the debate. I just, and I think I have, I was thinking about this the other day. It's like I have no hatreds for, yeah, I mean, even the characters in the book, as we talked about, it's like, oh man, Richard Hanania recently wrote a review, and he said, oh man, I came away from reading the book just hating the figures in the book. And to me, it was very surprising. And I thought to myself, that's interesting. I spent a lot of time reading and thinking about these people. Their political opinions, I think, have yielded disaster, but I don't have a personal sense of hatred or disgust. I have kind of, certainly, I think, a rational appraisal of their records, but I also try to understand them as human beings and try to be able to connect with them in that way first and foremost. And so, even people who have been really outright nasty with me or unfair with me, I can kind of let it go. I don't take it personally. I know who I am. I know what I believe. I know what I'm fighting for. And consequently, I think that I don't let anyone impose their image of me into my own consciousness, into my own self-definition. And so it kind of just falls off, and I can have fun with it. I can engage with it. I can play with it. I can subvert it. I can redirect it without it stinging, without it influencing me. And so I think that you try to bring a sense of joy or happiness or fun to it. And if you are the kind of person who gets angry, morose, taciturn, righteous, self-righteous, politics can chew you up. I mean, you see it destroy people. And I find that so unfortunate. And I don't think that temperamentally it's for everyone.
Well, I love that you use the words play with it and then use joy, because well, as you know, I think you have a sense of my public engagement. One of the things that perhaps separates me from a lot of other professors is, other than, of course, being able to be serious and austere and professorial if I go speak at Stanford, I'm also incredibly playful. I use satire. I wear the pink wig to try to mock, the woke folks. I self-flagellate and faux self-loathing. And people say, how do you pull it off? Well, it's because I immerse myself as a life motto. And I talk about this in my forthcoming book on happiness. I call it life as a playground, right? So even when we pursue very serious things, like in my case, let's say my scientific career, I view science as the highest form of play, right? Because what are you doing when you're engaging in science? You're taking a bunch of variables. There's this big puzzle of nature, and let's see which piece of the puzzle goes with which other piece, right? So in the same way that you try to complete a 1,000 piece puzzle, that's what science is. So even when we are engaging people on social media and being punchy and being a bit spicy, at least for myself, there's always a twinkle in my eye. I'm always playful. I never, and that's why I sometimes get frustrated when people end up taking it personally, as has happened with some public figures that I used to be friends with, I'm no longer friends with. I never go out to hurt someone or to truly demean them. It's all part of, as you said, an exchange of ideas. Once in a while, I use humor, satire, sarcasm. And I think that's been very, very, persuasive as a strategy to use. Oftentimes when I get approached by people on the street, they'll actually refer to my comedy routine more than to my actual cerebral work. Comedy works. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I know comedy absolutely works. And I think it's magnetic in its appeal. It draws people in, it makes them laugh, it exposes an uncomfortable truth or crosses a taboo in a way that you can only do through comedy. And I think, comedy is really one of the highest forms of art, of life, of expression. And I think perhaps maybe you are, and I am as well, as a good Italian, kind of Mediterranean in this approach. If you look at the Greeks had a kind of systematic, beautiful expression of comedy, many centuries ago. The Romans maybe a little less funny as it traveled westward, but to this day in Mediterranean cultures, I mean, if you talk about a group of men coming together from anywhere in the Mediterranean, they rib each other, they roast each other, they destroy each other. I mean, my dad and his Italian friends would just constantly mock each other for where they were from, for what their accents were. I mean, and it was all in good humor, and it was all a way of connecting beyond those differences. And so I think we may be more comfortable with that, whereas the kind of woke Anglo Protestant culture is a bit more cold. It's a bit more northern. It's a bit more dour. They can't handle the mockery and the kind of clever play with that. And so we're fighting against that as good Mediterraneans. But I think ultimately, even those Germans and Scandinavians and Anglos, they like the humor at the end of the day. I think that they can't resist it, and so I think we have to bring them over further. And I would like to see a society where kind of there's more latitude in what we can talk about, joke about, mock, and engage. And so I think that's why people like it. It also demonstrates, in a paradoxical way, courage.
Yes, it does.
If you're willing to be funny, truly funny, you actually have to have some courage. And so I think that's what people really appreciate about it deep down.
And self-deprecating humor is the ultimate form of courage and confidence, right? Because when you turn the humor inwards, that actually is paradoxically saying, I'm really confident in my skin and my personhood that I can make fun of myself,
Yeah.
Okay, well, I know earlier we talked about serendipity, so I don't know if my next question fits under that mold or it fits under the kind of a priori I'm thinking about the future. But do you ever foresee, now don't get coy if you have an answer, do you ever foresee going into politics right now? You've been a filmmaker, you've been a writer, or you are a writer, a very successful one, it turns out, on day one, starting from the blocks. Could you ever say, you know what, I'm tired of just being in the cerebral world. I want to be the top dog of change. I want to get into the race, or you don't ever foresee that?
No, I don't actually. And when I first started getting in politics, I was living in Seattle, and my neighbors persuaded me to try to run for city council. And it turned out to be kind of a disaster, honestly. I didn't understand politics. I didn't understand the dynamics of the city. I really got a kind of brutal lesson in bare knuckle politics in Seattle. I ended up just saying, this is not for me. I dropped the candidacy. I ended the campaign just not too long after it started. And it was a humbling moment, a humiliating moment in some ways. The kind of radical lefties, ran circles around me and gave me quite a showing. So 2 lessons from that. One is that some of those failures and humbling moments are create these serendipitous opportunities. And actually, that was really one of the best things that happened to me. I splashed into politics. I made these great relationships. It led me on this path to more journalism and think tank work. I learned a crash course in how politics really works, how power politics works, how media politics works. And I think that everything that I've learned that's been successful in the last few years I learned in that really awful 6-week period in running in Seattle politics. But the other lesson that I learned is that everyone is suited for a specific form, a specific method, and the actual running for political office. I have like so much respect for anyone who does it, and all the politicians that I work with, whether it's the President of the United States or Governor DeSantis, with whom I've worked closely, state legislators that I'm in communication with constantly. I'm in awe of how difficult their job is. I have no cynicism towards politicians at all. I have a deep respect for what they do. It's a very complex, very difficult position, requires a lot of self-sacrifice. And it's really just not for me. And so I think that my greatest influence, my greatest personal happiness, and then the really what I'm made for, what I'm built for, is doing the journalism, think tank work, reporting, short film making, book writing, running this kind of creative studio that I'm running, and then working with and actually serving the political leaders that are doing the really hard work of statesmanship, vote getting, baby kissing, hand holding, or in Joe Biden's case, baby hair sniffing and fondling. And so I think that it's like a symbiotic relationship, not a parasitic relationship. And I love working with these guys. And I find it so bizarre. A lot of people, even in think tank world or political media, they constantly bitch about politicians and, oh, these people are awful, uniparty, these guys are the worst. And it's like, what are you doing? These people have a much harder job than we do. These people are really putting themselves out there. And yeah, are they, playing to the crowd? Are they maybe not courageous in all fronts? But help them, inform them, persuade them, lead them, give them the tools that they need. And so I see my work in the political sphere as one of being helpful and providing the intellectual leadership. We have great guys that can run for office. But what I think we lack, especially on the political right, is the visionary intellectual leadership that can inform the political work in a substantive way. And so that's really where I see myself as most successful.
Got you. 2 last questions, and then you'll stay for happiness questions for our subscribers. Question 1, since we're talking about politics, do you care to weigh in at all in terms of whether you want to make a prediction or give your thoughts as to how do you see the GOP primary unfolding for the 2024 election?
Yeah. I don't really make predictions. I'm not a horse race analyst. I don't have any special insight into that kind of work. But I can say absolutely that I've publicly supported Governor DeSantis. I've worked with the governor on critical race theory, gender ideology, the fight with Walt Disney, and then the DEI reform in public universities. And in that time, over the last couple of years of really getting to know him, observing him closely, watching how he works, watching how he delegates to his team, I think he is far and away the best equipped of the Republican political leaders to lead the country in the right direction, to have the competence and self-discipline of leading a presidential administration, and just having the vision and the courage, not only to say the right thing, but to actually get the right thing done. And he is a really extraordinary person. He has intellectual gifts. He has rhetorical gifts. He has a gift for leadership and management. The team around him is just incredibly impressive. And so I'd love to see him in the White House. I'd love to see him in the Oval Office. I'm doing whatever I can as a think tank scholar to provide him with policy ideas, and certainly in my role as in my private capacity, in my non-think tank work, my non-nonprofit work, to support what he's doing. And so that said, he's going to have a hell of a challenge. He's going up against Donald Trump, who whatever you think about him, has an unbelievable ability to just wipe the board, to kind of clear out anyone that's standing in his way. And so we'll see. This is going to be a test of titans, perhaps in the coming months. And while so many of my colleagues are dreading the conflict, they're dreading the confrontation, I'm relishing it. I'm enjoying it. I can't wait for them to actually get on the debate stage, to go mano a mano, and we'll see what voters decide to do. You know, and you've been traveling in Florida quite a bit. I mean, it's just a great state, and his leadership has really been tremendous.
It is. Speaking of Florida, last question, then we'll do the happiness extra additional question. I know as an academic, my ears perked up when I heard about this new College of Florida that was instituting all kinds of, you know, classical liberal ideas, you know, anti-woke stuff. I know you are on the advisory board or board of governors. Could you take maybe a minute or two to tell us about some of the exciting things happening with that institution?
Yeah, absolutely. In January, Governor DeSantis appointed me, along with a number of other conservative reformers, as a new trustee majority on the board of trustees for the new College of Florida. It's a small public liberal arts college that had become really a social justice ghetto. It had a reputation as the lowest performing and the most woke university in the system. And DeSantis said, you know, we're not going to shut it down, although many legislators are trying to shut it down because it's just a disaster. We're going to actually take it over and reform it. So we came in, we fired the president. We brought in a very tough classical education minded person named Richard Corcoran, who also has immense political skills. He's been involved in Florida politics for many years. You know, the provost resigned. She was, you know, gone. I had gotten in a confrontation from her. She was trying to shut down a speech by me, the trustee. That's not going to fly. We're not going to do that. So she thankfully made a quick exit. We abolished the DEI department. We set the DEI director packing. She was fired and dispatched in short order. We now have, you know, many of the professors who are the most hardcore woke, who are the most hardcore gender ideologues, who really were hating this turn towards the classical liberal arts and having open expression. They have all, you know, many of them have self-selected out. They've resigned, their contracts weren't renewed, or they've, you know, taken up positions elsewhere. They've self-selected out because they don't want to have that open debate. They don't want to have civil discourse. They don't want to have a classical liberal arts institution. They want to have nonstop, you know, gender mania and you know, left-wing social theory. And we're bringing in now, hopefully, you know, 30 new academics, professors committed to a classical liberal arts frame. There's going to be debate, of course, with them, but they believe in the mission of the classical liberal arts. And so this is going to be an exciting thing. We're actually just announced that we have a record incoming class. We've recruited more students for our freshman year than any time in the college's history. And we entered this late in the cycle. We really didn't get started till February, March. And so we're going to expand the university. We have $50 million of new cash from the legislature. We have the biggest budget in the university's history, the best finances. We're bringing in record number of professors, record number of students. You know, I'm trying to entice many people, including you, to consider talking with the university and looking at it as a potential home, because what we're trying to do is something very simple. We want to have all of those academics who are brilliant, accomplished, but they're under siege by the DEI, by the wokes, by the students mobbing them. They don't feel protected. They don't feel supported. We want to be the new home for that. And actually, we're hoping to put together a new institute within the university with a number of very high-profile people from top-tier universities to develop policies to actually protect open discourse and civil debate on campus. We want to be a hub for that, not just at New College, but in many places. And so this is exciting. And for those of us that have been so dismayed by the kind of left-wing ideological capture of our institutions, we're creating a prototype for recapturing, reforming, and reconstituting those institutions on the basis of the classical liberal arts.
Incredibly exciting. Guys, the #1 book on Amazon as we speak. Go get it. Do the right thing. Christopher, what a pleasure to speak to you. I think this is the least of a superstar you'll ever be. You already are one, but you are going to be catapulted into the stratosphere, my good man. Great job. Congratulations on the success
That's
of the
very
book.
kind of you. Thank you so much.
Cheers. And stay on the line for an additional question to our subscribers. Thanks.
Okay.